My name is Robert Whitmore, and the moment I realized my son no longer saw me as family happened on a cold Tuesday evening in early December. Outside my kitchen window, Christmas lights blinked across the neighborhood. Red, green, white, red, green, white. My neighbor Bernard always put up his decorations the weekend after Thanksgiving. Every year, my late wife Pauline used to laugh and say he treated Christmas like a military operation. Even after 6 years without her, I could still hear her voice in moments like that. I was standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee when my phone vibrated. The message was from my son, Nathan. At first I smiled. We hadn't spoken much that week, and I assumed it would be something about the grandchildren. Maybe Elliot's school concert. Maybe Sophie wanted another art set. Instead, I opened the message and felt something inside me quietly break. Dad, we talked it over and think it's better if this year you celebrate Christmas on your own. We need space as a family. Diane and I have decided we're doing the holidays with just the kids. We hope you understand. I stared at the screen for a long time, long enough for my coffee to turn cold, long enough to read the message 4 times and still wonder if I was somehow misunderstanding it. I wasn't. Nathan and Diane had decided there was no place for me at Christmas. The strange thing was that my first feeling wasn't anger. It was embarrassment. The kind that comes when you suddenly realize you've been standing in the wrong place for years and everyone else noticed before you did. I set my phone face down on the counter and walked over to the dining room table. That's where the numbers started. I've always trusted numbers. Numbers don't lie. Feelings do. Memories do. Pride certainly does. But numbers tell the truth whether you want to hear it or not. I grabbed a legal pad and began writing. Mortgage payment, $2,900 a month. The house Nathan and Diane lived in was technically mine because Nathan couldn't qualify for the loan when they wanted to buy it 3 years earlier. Truck payment, $680. SUV payment, $520. Insurance coverage. Private school tuition for Elliot. The emergency credit card Diane carried in her purse. One expense after another. I added everything twice because I thought I must have made a mistake. I hadn't. The total sat there on the paper in black ink. More than $7,500 every month. Nearly $90,000 every year. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the number. $90,000 a year. To be told I should spend Christmas somewhere else. Suddenly, memories began connecting themselves in ways they never had before. The birthday parties I helped pay for. The family vacations I partially funded. The Christmas gifts that appeared under Nathan and Diane's names even though I had quietly purchased them myself. The endless emergencies that somehow always ended with my credit card being used. For years, I told myself I was helping because family helps family. But sitting there at that table, I finally asked a question I had avoided for a very long time. If I stopped paying, what would happen? The answer frightened me. Not because of what it would do to Nathan, because of what it would reveal about our relationship. I looked back at my phone. The message was still there. We need space as a family. The words echoed in my head. Space. After everything I had done, I had somehow become the outsider. I opened my banking application and stared at the automatic mortgage payment scheduled for the 15th. My thumb hovered over the screen. For several seconds, I thought about Pauline. Then I thought about spending Christmas alone while paying for the table I wasn't even welcome to sit at. Slowly, I opened the cancellation menu. For the first time in years, I seriously considered what life might look like if I stopped funding my son's entire world. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. Then I remembered the message. Christmas on your own. We need space as a family. The words settled over me like a weight. I made breakfast, fed the birds outside the window, and tried convincing myself to wait a few days before doing anything. That lasted until I opened my banking app again. The mortgage payment was still there. $2,900. Scheduled. Waiting. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I pressed cancel. A confirmation window appeared. Are you sure? I pressed yes. Nothing dramatic happened. No thunder. No feeling of victory. Just a small notification confirming the payment had been removed. Then I moved to the next one. Nathan's truck, canceled. Diane's SUV, canceled. One by one, the obligations disappeared from my screen. Looking at them individually, each payment seemed reasonable. Looking at them together, they felt like evidence. Evidence of a life I had been financing without ever questioning where the line should have been drawn. And for the first time in many years, I began to wonder whether I had been helping my family or simply making it easier for them to forget my value. I think she saw this coming long before either of us realized it. I slowly nodded. That sounded exactly like Pauline. She always noticed the small cracks before they turned into serious problems. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then Nathan finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air throughout the entire conversation. Are you still going to sell the house? The answer hurt both of us. Yes. He closed his eyes for a moment but didn't argue. That alone showed how much he had changed. A month earlier, he would have challenged the decision. He would have listed reasons, explanations, and financial worries. Now he simply nodded. I thought you would. Over the next few weeks, reality moved forward quickly. The house went on the market. Showings started almost immediately. The housing market was stronger than expected, and before long, serious buyers began making offers. Nathan and Diane started looking for other places to live. For the first time in their marriage, every housing option had to fit within the budget they actually had, not the one I had quietly supported behind the scenes. The adjustment wasn't easy. Apartments felt smaller. Mortgage choices looked less appealing. Financial decisions suddenly came with real consequences. Through mutual friends, I heard that Diane was struggling with the changes. Part of her still believed I would change my mind at the last minute. I didn't, not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because changing my decision would undo everything Nathan was finally beginning to understand. One Saturday afternoon, I attended another one of Elliot's soccer matches. After the game, he sat beside me on the bleachers while the other kids ran around the field. "Dad says we're moving," he said. "Children have a way of talking about life-changing events with remarkable simplicity." "That's true," I replied. "Are you sad?" I thought carefully before answering. "A little." Elliot nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense. "Me too." Then he smiled. "But Dad says we'll be okay." Hearing those words felt important. Not because they guaranteed everything would work out, because Nathan was finally taking responsibility for his own future. A few weeks later, the house officially sold. The paperwork was completed. The money was transferred. An important chapter in our family's story came to an end. That evening, Nathan called me. His voice sounded different than it had a few months earlier. Stronger, more confident, more grounded. "We found a place," he said. "It's smaller, but it's ours." I smiled quietly. There was pride in his voice. Real pride. The kind that comes from earning something rather than simply receiving it. As the conversation ended, I looked at Pauline's photograph and thought about the letter Nathan had discovered in the attic. Maybe she had been right all along. Sometimes love means helping someone, and sometimes love means stepping back far enough for them to discover how strong they can become on their own. What neither Nathan nor I realized yet was that the biggest changes were still ahead of us. Winter slowly turned into spring, and for the first time in years, my relationship with Nathan no longer revolved around money. The change didn't happen all at once. It happened through dozens of small moments that most people probably wouldn't have noticed. Nathan stopped calling whenever something broke. He stopped calling whenever an unexpected bill arrived. He stopped calling every time life became difficult or inconvenient. Instead, he started handling problems himself. The first time I truly noticed it, he was telling me about a plumbing issue in the apartment he rented after leaving the house. Months earlier, I would have received a phone call asking for advice, money, or both. This time, he simply laughed and explained how many online tutorials he had watched before fixing it himself. The story wasn't especially exciting, but I remember smiling the entire time he told it. Because for the first time, he sounded proud of something he had accomplished without any help from me. Financially, life remained tighter for Nathan and Diane than it had been before. Vacations happened less often. Spending became more deliberate. Large purchases required planning rather than assumptions. Yet something interesting happened. The world didn't fall apart. The children adjusted. The family adjusted. Even Diane slowly began accepting a reality she had spent years trying to avoid. Through occasional conversations, I learned she had gone back to part-time consulting work. Nathan took on extra responsibilities at his company. Together, they created a real budget, not one supported by hidden contributions from me, a budget supported entirely by their own efforts. One Saturday morning, Nathan invited me to breakfast. It was a small diner near the soccer field where Elliot played. Nothing fancy, no special occasion, just breakfast. Halfway through the meal, he reached for the bill. Instinctively, I moved to stop him. The habit was automatic. Nathan smiled and gently pushed my hand away. "I've got it." The moment lasted less than 5 seconds, yet it carried more meaning than conversations that lasted for hours. On the drive home, I found myself thinking about Pauline. Years earlier, I believed protecting my family meant removing every obstacle from their path. Looking back, I realized I had often confused protection with control. Every problem I solved prevented someone else from learning how to solve it. Every burden I carried prevented someone else from learning how much weight they were capable of carrying themselves. The realization wasn't entirely comfortable. Nathan had made mistakes, but so had I. Around the same time, Elliot's school held a family project exhibition. As we walked through the displays together, he proudly showed me a presentation about responsibility. One section listed important lessons he had learned during the year. I expected something about teamwork or homework. Instead, one sentence immediately caught my attention. "Doing things yourself makes you stronger." I stared at those words for several moments. Then I looked toward Nathan standing across the room. He had noticed the sentence too. Our eyes met briefly. Neither of us said a word. We didn't need to. Sometimes growth becomes visible in the people around you before you fully recognize it in yourself. By early summer, the tension that had once defined our relationship had mostly disappeared. Not because everything was perfect, because honesty had replaced dependency. We were finally learning how to be father and son again, instead of provider and recipient. And as I watched Nathan build a life that truly belonged to him, I began to understand something important. Losing the house had never been the real consequence. The real consequence was being forced to become the man he should have become years earlier. By the time Christmas arrived the following year, my life looked very different from what it had looked like 12 months before. The strange thing was that almost none of those changes involved money. The house Nathan and Diane once lived in belonged to another family now. The mortgage payments were gone. The emergency credit card was gone. The endless financial responsibilities that had quietly connected our lives for years had disappeared. Yet somehow, I felt closer to my son than I had in a very long time. A few days before Christmas, Nathan called and invited me over for dinner. Not because he needed help paying a bill, not because he wanted financial advice, simply because he wanted me there. When I arrived, Elliot was the first one through the door. He nearly knocked me backward with the force of his hug. Sophie followed close behind, carrying a handmade Christmas card and insisting that I open it immediately. The apartment was smaller than the old house, much smaller. The furniture didn't perfectly match. The decorations weren't expensive, but something about the place felt warmer, more genuine. For the first time, I was looking at a life built by Nathan and Diane rather than a life partly financed by me. During dinner, we laughed more than we had in years. Real laughter, not the polite kind people use to avoid uncomfortable conversations. At one point, Nathan raised his glass and looked around the table. "I want to thank Dad," he said. The room grew quiet. "Not for paying for things," he added with a slight smile. "For finally stopping." Everyone laughed, even me. But beneath the humor was something important. Understanding. Nathan no longer saw my decision as punishment. He understood it for what it truly was, a boundary, a necessary one. Later that evening, after the children disappeared to inspect their presents, I stepped onto the apartment balcony. Snow drifted gently through the night air. A moment later, Nathan joined me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked out across the city lights and quietly said, "Mom was right." I smiled. "About what?" He laughed. "Which thing?" "She was right about almost everything." That sounded exactly like something Pauline would have enjoyed hearing. Nathan became serious again. "She used to say that love isn't measured by what people give you. It's measured by what remains when the giving stops." I felt my throat tighten slightly, because after everything that had happened, we had finally discovered the answer. What remained was still family. Not a perfect family, not an effortless family, a real family, built on respect instead of dependence, built on honesty instead of obligation. As I stood there watching the snow fall across the city, I thought about the Christmas message that had started everything. At the time, it felt like betrayal. Maybe it was, but sometimes the most painful moments in life force us to face truths we have been avoiding for years. Nathan learned responsibility. I learned boundaries. And together we learned something Pauline had understood all along. Love becomes strongest when it is freely given rather than financially supported. And for the first time in many years, Christmas finally felt like home.